Greetings, this is Chris Krieger again. I'm here to make my Week 2 NFL predictions. Last week I went 7-8-1. I picked some games, I missed a lot of games. I went 0 for 3 on my upset specials. I picked Houston to beat New England, I picked Chicago to beat Green Bay, and I picked the Giants to beat Jacksonville. Strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. Hopefully I'll do a little better this week. Now, as I did last week, I wasn't able to record or predict the Thursday night game. I would have predicted the Ravens to beat the Bengals given Cincinnati's primetime home game record, so I'm starting the week 0-1. The big early game, the Minnesota Vikings at the Green Bay Packers. Kirk Cousins and the Vikings had a very solid, impressive, workmanlike victory over Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers, while the Packers had probably the most dramatic win of Week 1, with all due respect to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They fell behind 20-0. Khalil Mack was dominating. Aaron Rodgers got taken off the field. Looked like he was hurt for the game, if not longer. He comes back. He throws 3 touchdowns, all in the fourth quarter, and added to the Rodgers legend. Now, Minnesota and Green Bay will be a very interesting game this week at Lambeau Field. Last year, the Vikings shut out the Packers at Lambeau Field for the team's first shutout since 1993, but that was against the backup quarterback, not Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers is a little dinged up this week, so it'll be very interesting to see how Rodgers, if he can go, will go against Minnesota. A lot of pressure on Kirk Cousins this week because this is a big game that they signed him for, although he's got other big games to play. I mean, he's also got to play New Orleans, he's also got to play Philadelphia, he's also got to play the Rams, he's got New England in December. This is the first big one for him. And I'm going to pick Minnesota in this one. I think their defense is better, I think they're healthier, and they won at Lambeau recently, so I don't think they have any fear of playing there. And I know Rodgers is Rodgers, but I think Green Bay got a little lucky last week, and I have a feeling we're going to look back and say, man, they should have been 0-2 if not for the Bears making a couple mistakes and Rodgers being Rodgers. Next up, Kansas City Chiefs at Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh boy, Pittsburgh. You tie on opening day. You had a chance to beat the Browns. You're up 14 in the fourth quarter, 2 fumbles, give up 2 touchdowns, miss a field goal, then block a field goal. A tie. Kansas City, if Pittsburgh was discouraging, Kansas City was encouraging. In a game I picked the Chiefs to lose, they lit up the Chargers in Los Angeles. Patrick Mahomes looked very, very impressive. Tyreek Hill did Tyreek Hill things, and Kansas City made me look like an idiot. I'm going to pick Pittsburgh this weekend, though, because the Steelers in recent years have shown Ben Roethlisberger is a different quarterback at home, and playing at Heinz Field, with all due respect to last week, will be a little tough for Mahomes compared to the predominantly Chiefs-dominated crowd at the Chargers Stadium, so I'm going to pick Pittsburgh to get back to 1-0-1 and somehow still be undefeated. Next game, the Miami Dolphins at the New York Jets. Miami had the longest game of last week, literally, with a rain delay twice and lightning delay win over the Titans. That was impressive. What the Jets did, boy, that was impressive. Sam Darnold, rookie savior, first throw, pick 6. Oh no, same old Jets! Well, not quite. He threw a couple touchdowns, they hit some long plays, great third quarter, embarrassed the Lions at Ford Field. Jets fans are giddy. And I think it'll continue. I'm going to pick the Jets in Week 2. I'm going to take them over Miami. They beat Miami last year when Miami was better and the Jets are worse. I don't know about the Dolphins. Ryan Tannehill, he looked okay, but I don't know about Miami long term. I think the Jets have something going. Next game, Carolina Panthers at Atlanta Falcons. 2 teams that didn't look good in Week 1. Carolina, they look good defensively, but they lost some key players due to injuries. Atlanta, woof. Not only do they have the goal line debacles, not once but twice on 4th and goal at Philadelphia, they lost Deion Jones, their stud in the defensive back. He's going to be out for at least this game, if not longer, and that could really, really hurt them. The game is in Atlanta, though, and Carolina and Atlanta are both banged up in this game. I'm going to call the hunch, but I'm going to take Carolina in this one. I think Atlanta, that game can linger, and that's a tough game to lose, and throw the injuries, and Carolina, they are healthier on offense, and they seem to know what they're doing in the red zone. I think the Falcons are going to have what a lot of people call the Super Bowl home jinx. When a team stadium hosts the Super Bowl, more often than not, last year's Vikings were an exception, things don't go well for the home team. Like Dallas in 2010, their stadium hosted the Super Bowl, it was a bad year. Other years, similar. Saints had it at 1980 Saints, 1-15. Miami a couple years ago, almost went 1-15, and so on and so on. Teams that their stadium hosts the Super Bowl in here, more often than not, it does not go well. Next up, the Cleveland Browns at the New Orleans Saints. From a Browns perspective, the tie against Pittsburgh was very, very encouraging. You were down 14, you could have packed it in. Myles Garrett almost single-handedly won that game on himself. And the Saints, oh my God, of all the games I picked last week, I could not have been any more wrong on any game than New Orleans. I thought this was going to be the lock of the week, but as Chris Berman always said on NFL Primetime, that's why they play the games, and the defense unfortunately reverted to old form rather than last year's form against Tampa Bay. In this game, now, a lot of trends are interesting and pointing to Cleveland. Since the Browns returned to the NFL in 1999, they have actually fared very well against the Saints. They have won 5 of 6 games against the Saints. The first win for the Browns 2.0, beginning in 1999, was fittingly on Halloween against the Saints. They also beat them in 2002, 2010, 2014. The only time the Saints have beaten the Browns was 2006, Drew Brees' first game with the Saints. And they also lost to the Browns before the move in 93, so really they've only beaten them twice since 1987 if you throw in a 1990 game. I gotta pick the Saints again. I cannot see them starting 0-2 with 2 home starts against Tampa Bay and Cleveland. I think the Saints will block better against the Browns defense, and I don't know if Tyrod Taylor is as capable of getting hot as Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't know if they have weapons like the Deshaun Jackson. Here's the thing with Cleveland. With all due respect to Josh Gordon, if Josh Gordon is going to be Tampa Bay's equivalent of Mike Evans, he doesn't have a Deshaun Jackson and they can run the ball. If they're going to win, they got to play clock ball, control the ball because they don't have the game breaker to exploit them, and you know the Saints are going to come out ticked, so I'm going to take the Saints. Next up, Indianapolis Colts at Washington Redskins. Boy, you want to talk about time flying in this game. A couple years ago, Colts versus Redskins would have been Andrew Luck versus RG3, Robert Griffin III. Well, Luck's still there, but Robert Griffin III, well, that's another story entirely. He's now with the Baltimore Ravens, and now the Redskins are starting over with another guy, only instead of a young gun, it's an old reliable, an Alex Smith. Last week, Andrew Luck, in his first game in 2 years, he had flashes of brilliance against the Bengals, and it wasn't his fault they lost the game. If you recall, the Colts were driving for a potential go-ahead score against the Bengals. He got the first down, but one of the wide receivers fumbled it, and it got returned for a touchdown, game, set, match. As for Washington, I said last week, who's he going to throw to? Well, it turns out Alex Smith throws to a lot of guys, and I think I overestimated Arizona last week. This game, I'm going to take Washington. They're at home. The Colts are not a good road team historically, even when Andrew Luck was healthier and the Colts had rosters. And even though this will probably be Washington's first non-sellout in a long, long time, I think they'll find a way to get the win and a rare 2-0 start. Next up, the Philadelphia Eagles at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 2 1-0 teams that did it completely oppositely. Philadelphia did it about the way I predicted. Run the ball, timely defense, come up clutch in big spots at the goal line against Atlanta. Tampa Bay proved me wrong. I said last week Tampa Bay might be the worst non-Browns team this year. Well, they proved me wrong and then some. You hang 48 points in the Superdome. Ryan Fitzpatrick, of all people, looked like a passing god. Now, they're going to be at home this week, and Philadelphia still going to be without Alshon Jeffrey, but I'm going to take the Eagles in this spot because they are a better defense, and I cannot see them letting Tampa Bay players get as wide open as the Saints did. And even though it's in Tampa, the Bucs have had a tendency to have visiting fan bases invade their stadium when they're really popular. The Steelers did it in 2010, the Cowboys did it once, the Patriots did it. For whatever reason, Buccaneers, it's kind of a little bit like the Dallas Cowboys in that sometimes popular fan bases will invade the stadium, so I'll take Philadelphia to get to 2-0. Next up, Houston Texans versus the Tennessee Titans. 2 teams that did not look good in Week 1. Houston, though, it was a little more understandable. I picked them to pull the upset, but the Patriots did Patriot things, and unfortunately, I thought Houston could get off the schneid in New England, but like the Lions at RFK for years, some trends are not meant to be broken. Tennessee, on the other hand, oh boy. Delaney Walker lost for the season with the injury. Mariota got banged up. You give up a long touchdown. You lose to Miami, a team that you beat handily last year. Excuse me. And now, the good news is you're at home. The bad news is, again, Mariota banged up, Delaney Walker out for the year. Now, what do you do if you're the Titans? Because they don't have a Tom Brady, they don't have a Rob Gronkowski. What you gotta do, you gotta pressure them, but they don't have the pass rush to do it, so I'll take Houston this spot because the Titans are a bit of a downgrade from the Patriots, And the Texans actually were a decent road team at times last year. Next up, last of the early 1 o'clock games, the Los Angeles Chargers at the Buffalo Bills. Two teams that lost last week in different styles. Chargers got outgunned by the Chiefs. Phillip Rivers had some good moments, but he was betrayed by a bad special teams miscue, a missed field goal, and some drop passes. Buffalo, on the other hand, had basically nothing go right. Nathan Peterman was awful, the defense was awful, they couldn't run, and they lost by a mere 44 points. I picked Buffalo to lose last week, but I didn't think they were going to look this bad. Having said that, I'm going to pick Buffalo for the upset this week against the Chargers. Nathan Peterman will not be starting against the Chargers, thankfully, because if you remember, last November, he was thrown into the fire at the Chargers, and he had a 5-interception first half. Even Stafford didn't throw his 5th interception last week until the 4th quarter. So Josh Allen can't do any worse, and Joey Bosa, he didn't play last week, he's not going to play this week. That's a big break for Buffalo, and like the 49ers last week, Chargers, West Coast team, flying east, 1 o'clock, early start. A lot of teams struggle in this spot. Phillip Rivers, he's had good games against the Bills, but he has had his stumbles against the Bills, so I'm going to take Buffalo for the upset. Now on to the 4 late games. The first one is the Arizona Cardinals at the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams looked a little slow early on against the Raiders, but they figured it out eventually and erupted in the 4th quarter. Although technically, if you count the last bit of the 3rd quarter, but they erupted for 20 late unanswered points. The Cardinals, whom I picked last week, oh boy, they looked bad. They got dominated at home by Washington, although maybe I should have been surprised considering that the Cardinals had mostly struggled in home games against the Redskins going back to their NFC East days. Now on the surface, you think, okay, you have the most talented team in the league perhaps in the Rams. You have a rookie coach, Sam Bradford, Josh Rosen, not looking good. You know what? I'm going to pick an upset here. I think the Cardinals are going to beat the Rams. I think the Rams might be a little too overconfident after last week. The Cardinals are not as bad as they looked last week. I think Bradford's going to play better. I think David Johnson can bust some big runs. Larry Fitzgerald can do Larry Fitzgerald things. And I think the Cardinals will pull a big surprise this week. They're a big underdog. But if I were a betting man, I would pick the Cardinals in this spot. Next up, the Detroit Lions at the San Francisco 49ers. Both teams are 0-1. The 49ers lost in what I would consider a predictable situation. I mentioned with the Chargers, West Coast team, 1 o'clock, go east, early start. And quite frankly, they played pretty well at times. Jimmy Garoppolo, he was betrayed by some drop passes, a fumble at the goal line, workable. The Lions, with all due respect to New Orleans and Chicago and Atlanta, oh my God, that might have been the worst loss of the week. They basically allowed 1 fewer point than the Buffalo Bills at home, including 31 points in the 3rd quarter alone. Matthew Stafford threw 5 interceptions, in basically turning into Nathan Peterman at a bad time. And I'm going to pick the 49ers this week because Matt Patricia didn't look good. He looked a little out of his element, and that was at home. Now the Lions have to go to a place they rarely, if ever, would. The Lions have not had a very good track record at San Francisco. They lost there in 91, they lost there in 88, they lost there in 96, 98. You get where I'm going with this. I think Jimmy G and the Niners will recover because the Lions, quite frankly, looked very, very poor, especially on the road under Matthew Stafford. And coaching, Kyle Shanahan didn't look out of place. He knows his team got screwed up by a couple of drops and a fumble, which is something I think he can correct. Matt Patricia looked very out of place, and that was at home. I don't see that reversing on the road. Next up, one of my favorite NFL rivalries, one of the older rivalries, at least going back to the AFL days, the Oakland Raiders against the Denver Broncos. Denver had a pretty nice win in Week 1 against Seattle. Von Miller looked like a monster. Case Keenum had 3 picks, but he did a good job getting the ball down the field, better than Trevor Siemian. The tight ends and the running game, Denver looked pretty nice. Seattle, on the other hand, well, we'll get to them a little later. Oakland, on the other hand, I was worried about them last week. First drive of the season, touchdown drive, Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, here come the Raiders, John Gruden is back! And they never scored another touchdown the rest of the game, and the defense was exactly what I feared it would be. Now, Oakland has held up pretty decently against Denver. They were 3-3 in their last 6 games against them, and Derek Carr did win there a couple years ago. Unfortunately, though, although Carr did win in Denver in 2015, that was predominantly thanks to the no longer a Raider and now prematurely departed Khalil Mack, who had a 5-sack game. Mac isn't there. Carr isn't what he once was. They don't have Crabtree. Cooper had a lot of bad play. Cooper did not look good in week 1. I'm going to take Denver in this spot because if the Raiders couldn't beat them in recent years with better rosters, I can't see this one happening. And John Gruden does not do well against Denver. In his first stint as Raider coach, he was 1-7 against them. And if you include his Tampa Bay days, he lost twice against them. So the Broncos, for all intents and purposes, have proven to be his kryptonite, and I still think it'll be that way until I see otherwise. Last of the late games, the big late game. New England Patriots versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is an AFC Championship game rematch. In January, the Jaguars, whom practically were given very little chance outside the state of Florida, had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter with the chance to shock the world and make history. But then Tom Brady did Tom Brady things, and we were reminded once again that the New England Patriots are as possible to put away more often than not when the chips are down in the fourth quarter. I said more often than not because the Eagles did beat them in the Super Bowl, but more often than not, in late game situations, it's hard to beat Tom Brady. This week, I'm going to take New England. As much as I think Jacksonville, they're at home, the pass rush, the defense and all that, we all know New England is a great big game team, and Belichick and Brady, they always find ways to find ways, and they're a good road team. I'll take New England to go to 2-0. Sunday Night Football. The New York Football Giants at the Dallas Cowboys. The Giants lost week 1 to the aforementioned Jacksonville Jaguars, but they look good at times and probably could have won if not for a bad fumbled punt and a couple of miscues. Dallas, on the other hand, if the New Orleans Saints looked like the worst defense last week, the Cowboys were one of the worst offenses. Dak did not look good. Zeke had trouble running. The offensive line was a bit of a shambles with a key player missing. Dan Bailey was cut, and the new guy on cue missed a field goal. And Eli Manning is going to Jerry World, where he's had very, very good games. He won the first game there in 2009. He won a game that pretty much put them on their Super Bowl path in 2011. Eli has had the Cowboys number historically, if you think about it, and I'm going to take them again. I think Barkley can get some runs. I think Odell can get loose because he went 111 yards last week, and that was against Jalen Ramsey, and the Dallas Cowboy defense, to my knowledge, does not have a Jalen Ramsey, does not have an A.J. Bouye, does not have a Calais Campbell, and they were not able to get Earl Thomas as much as I thought they could have. I'll take the Giants, and I think Dallas is on a bad stretch. I'm going to make a bold prediction here. Jason Garrett will be fired before Thanksgiving. Monday Night Football. Chicago Bears host the Seattle Seahawks. I mentioned earlier Seattle lost to Denver in a run-of-the-mill game, a losable game. Russell Wilson looked good, the tight ends looked good, the punting game looked good. But what happened with Seattle was understandable. It was on the road at Denver. They historically struggle there, and they're trying to adjust to a new team, a new year, and they lost the Legion of Boom. Chicago, that was a brutal loss. You have a 20-point lead. Khalil Mack is looking like a god, but like I said, Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, and the Bears, for whatever reason, have had a ton of trouble against Aaron Rodgers. But I think the Bears can bounce back this week. Some teams lose a brutal game 1, and they don't recover for the rest of the season. But Russell Wilson, with all due respect, is not Aaron Rodgers. The Seattle offensive line is not as good. And last week, Von Miller got 3 sacks against Russell Wilson in Seattle, so I could see Khalil Mack doing that again. And I could see Chicago running the ball again. I think Trubisky will look confident because he's not going against the Legion of Boom anymore. And I think Chicago will get their first win of the season. To recap my Week 2 picks, I would have picked the Ravens over the Bengals. I have the Vikings over the Packers. I have the Steelers over the Chiefs. I have the Jets over the Dolphins. I have the Falcons losing to the Panthers. I have the Saints over the Browns. I have the Redskins to beat the Colts. I have Philadelphia beating Tampa Bay. I have Houston beating Tennessee. I have the Bills upsetting the Chargers. I have the Cardinals to upset the Rams. I have the 49ers beating the Lions. I have the Broncos over the Raiders. I have the Patriots over the Jaguars. I have the Giants over the Cowboys. And I have the Bears over the Seahawks. Again, if you want to give your takes or your opinions on my picks, my Twitter is at Chris S. Krieger, International House of Bills fan. My Facebook is Chris Krieger. My Instagram is Chris K Sports. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is also Chris Krieger. Thank you, and good night, America and Canada.